also made a top 10 worst Elite Four members list in a similar vein on Brandon's channel.
Any bets on how painful that video's gonna be? Fuck it, let's see how bad it really is.
You'd have to pay me to touch that one.
Well, more for me, let's do this shit!
After you defeat all
Nice to know you learned one thing in the past couple of months. Too bad learning to sit farther away from the camera is such a small detail in the grand scheme of making videos.
Or aren't always so challenging. As a matter of fact, some of them just aren't challenging at all.
This will come up later, and I will have a lot to say about it.
But some of them just fall short of the mark. But which Elite Four members are the worst in battle? With so many Elite Four members to choose from, there's no way I could have done this by myself. That's right, my special guest, Tamashii Hiroka, who's also a huge Pokemon fan that's been doing Pokemon videos for years on YouTube.
And whose video quality seems to have dropped in recent times, judging by how bad the other quote-unquote collaborative top 10 list between you two was.
Is here to help me count down the worst Elite Four members. I'm going to be listing off my top 5 worst, and she's going to be listing off her top 5 worst.
Meaning it's just 2 top 5 lists put together to artificially make a top 10 list, and that we won't know who's number 10 and who's number 9 and who's better than who and so on. At least that's one less thing I'll have to cover in my final thoughts.
So, without further ado, let's get it started. I'm starting off my worst Elite Four picks with Chantal from Pokemon Black and White. She's a bookworm who always enjoys reading a good novel, like 50 Shades of Pokemon Gray. Since, you know, she's in Pokemon Black and White, Gray. Oh, never mind.
Oh, so you realized it was a stupid joke that you kept it in this video anyways. I understand that humor is subjective, but if you're willing to acknowledge that a joke is stupid, isn't that a sign that you should leave that joke out? Please don't make me play the Akroloth clip explaining that acknowledging a problem isn't the same as fixing it.
The Elite Four in Pokemon Black and White were some of the strongest members we'd seen in a while. However, Chantal just didn't seem to fit in with the difficulty of the other 3 members. She specializes in Ghost-type Pokemon, much like Agatha did in the first generation. But with Dark-type Pokemon like Crocodile on your team, you had nothing to worry about in this battle. Literally, all you had to do was spam Crunch, or any other powerful Dark-type move, and you would sweep her entire team very quickly.
The problem with your statement of using a Dark-type Pokemon is that good Dark-type options were limited in the Gen 5 games. What if you were using a different Ground-type on your team and didn't want to use Crocodile? You were stuck with either the Purloin line, the Scraggy line, the Zorua line, the Pawniard line, the Vullaby line, or the Dino line. Lightbird isn't very good, Scraggy takes a long time to train and evolve, Pawniard takes an even longer time to train and evolve, and you find it later in the game, Zorua may not be available depending on which game you're playing, same with Vullaby for different reasons. If Vullaby is available, you won't be able to get it until around the time you reach the final gym. Dino and Svilas can't be caught until Victory Road. I've used Svilas on my team to fight the Elite Four in White in the past. It was hard. And if you do want to grind it to evolve into a Hydreigon before taking on the Elite Four, good luck grinding it up to level 64. Also, even if you do use Crocodile in your team as your Dark-type mon to deal with Chantal's Ghost types, her Pokemon will give your Crocodile a hard time. Cofagrigus has Grass Knot and Will-O-Wisp. Grass Knot uses Cofagrigus' decent special attack, and Crocodile's special defense is fairly low, meaning it will hurt. A lot. And Will-O-Wisp will be a pain in your ass because burns mean your Crunch will do a lot less damage thanks to Burns lowering attack, and Crunch using the attacker's attack stat to determine damage. And with how bulky Cofagrigus is already, there's no way your Crocodile is going to take it out in one hit unless you're over-leveled and or you crit. Meaning that Cofagrigus will probably get an attack in on you unless you get a critical hit. Its Grass Knot is replaced with Energy Ball in her rematch team, which has a chance of lowering Crocodile's special defense even further. Regarding Jellicent, Not only is Jellicent part water, but it has Cursed Body as an ability, meaning there's the 30% chance that your crunch spamming will come to a screeching halt for a few turns thanks to Cursed Body disabling the move. Golurk has Brick Break as an attack, and Golurk's attack stat is quite good. Crocodile will be in a lot of pain from that. Rematches replace Brick Break with Hammer Arm, which does even more damage, and it has Iron Fist as an ability, which makes it even more powerful. Chandelure has Flame Body as an ability, meaning that if Cofagrigus didn't get to burn Crocodile with Will-O-Wisp, attacking Chandelure with Crunch will most likely get it burned. And Frostlass becomes the new addition to Chantal's rematch team. Hi Blizzard! Her team in Black 2 and White 2 replaces Jellicent with Driftblim, but Cofagrigus and Golurk are still there to give you trouble. And Chandelure is made even more difficult to deal with thanks to Chandelure knowing Energy Ball. And in her rematch team in the sequel games, Frostlass comes back. I've used Crocodile on my team against Chantal. It was nowhere near as easy as you make it out to be.
At least Agatha had a little diversity with poison types like Arbok on her team. That way they weren't all ghost types. That made her more of a challenge compared to Chantal.
Agatha's team was not more diverse than Chantal's. Despite Agatha being a ghost-type trainer, the Ghastly Evolutionary line were the only ghost-type mons available at the time, and all three shared poison as their secondary type. You know what types Arbok and Golbat, the other two Pokemon on her team, shared? Poison! If you had a Psychic-type Pokemon on your team, you had no problems whatsoever with Agatha, since you actually could just spam Psychic and wipe the floor with her team. In fact, I would go further and argue that Agatha's team is less diverse than Chantal's, because all of Agatha's mons share a poison typing, which she's supposed to be a ghost-type trainer. Arbok was pure poison, and Golbat was part flying, which didn't do much for it since its fly-type attack move in the Gen 1 games was Wind Attack, which wasn't all that powerful, and it didn't have any offensive poison moves to take advantage of Poison's same-type attack bonus in the Gen 1 games. It got Air Cutter and Poison Fang and Fire Red and Leaf Green, and it evolved into a Crobat and a rematch team in those games while replacing Poison Fang with Sludge Bomb, but that really doesn't do much for it in the grand scheme of things. It may have gotten moves to help with Psychic-type mons in both teams, and it may be more powerful as a Crobat, but that doesn't change the fact that it's still weak to Psychic, Electric, Rock, and Ice-type moves, which you probably have most, if not all, covered in your team. Furthermore, all but one Pokemon on a rematch team continue to share the poison typing. That one mon that wasn't part poison in a rematch team? Misdreavus, which only makes sense given its pure ghost typing and that she's supposed to be the ghost type user of the Kanto Elite Four. Also, each mon in Chantal's team had a secondary type that no other member of her team shared with it. With the exceptions of Cofagrigus, since Cofagrigus is a pure ghost type, Banette, which was a second pure ghost type that she had in her first team in Black 2 and White 2 if you played through its challenge mode, and Miss Magius, another pure ghost type mon which she had on a rematch team if you played through Black 2 and White 2 on easy mode or normal mode. I'm detecting a bias in favor of the Kanto games here.
Plus, Agatha lives with graves in her room. Now that's hardcore. And Chantal? She probably lives with her collection of Twilight books.
Okay, even if this was just a stupid joke, I still have to say this. You know why Chantal's room is a dimly lit library? Because dark settings and atmospheres are a common element of horror novels and gothic novels, like Frankenstein, Dracula, and The Castle of Otranto, just to name a few examples. The Twilight series, in spite of their supernatural element, are not gothic novels, nor are they horror novels. And even if you only brought up 50 Shades for a stupid pun earlier on, I'd still like to point out that the 50 Shades books apply even less, since they don't even have a supernatural element to them. Granted, they are unintentionally horrifying, but that's another matter. Really, dude, if you're gonna crack jokes about how she allegedly has bad taste in books, at least use examples from the relevant genres. I'm a bookworm, can't you tell?
Number 5, Will. My pick for number 5, Will, has a lot going for him. He has a cool outfit, he's the first ever to represent Psychic types in the Elite Four, and he's got purple hair. But considering he's repping Psychic types in Gen 2, the ones he ended up with are a little disappointing. He has mostly Gen 1 Pokemon on his team, and the Gen 2 Pokemon he has is just Xatu twice. He could have at least tried out an Espeon or something.
I'll give you the point that Espeon or any other pure Psychic type mon would have worked better in his team than a second Xatu. Even Girafarig would have worked better. At least then Will would have had a mon with an immunity to ghost type moves.
but instead he's left with Pokemon we've seen before.
Okay, let's look at the Psychic-type Pokemon that were introduced in Gen 2, not counting the Not-So evolutionary line since he has Zatu on his team, nor Lugia and Celebi since they're legendaries. Espeon, Slowcane, Unknown, Wobbuffet, Girafarig, and Smoochum. Smoochum evolves into Jinx, so Will having a Jinx on his team actually works in that regard. I've already mentioned how Girafarig could have worked. Wobbuffet's style of fighting by pure retaliation is tricky to work with in the Gen 2 games. Unknown would be extremely difficult to use in battle since the only move it can never know is Hidden Power, and that move depends on individual values to determine its typing. It can be debated that Slowking would work better on his team than Slowbro, but the only difference is that Slowbro has a higher defense than special defense, while those stats are flipped for Slowking. And I already gave you credit regarding Espeon, since Espeon actually is a good pure Psychic type mon. But regarding your complaints about how the majority of the Pokemon on his team are mons we've seen before, that can also apply to any of the other Johto Elite Four members. You could argue that it doesn't work that well for Koga since only 2 of the 5 mons on his team are Kanto mons, but I would counter with the fact that Koga is a Johto Elite 4 member in the first place, given that he was the Fuchsia gym leader in the previous games. Also, of course Johto trainers would have Kanto mons, given that all those Kanto mons are obtainable in the Johto region. Never mind the fact that Kanto is literally connected to Johto, and that you go through the Kanto region after defeating the Johto Elite Four, so your complaints about Will having Pokemon we've seen before does not work.
Considering he's the first member of the Johto Elite Four, he doesn't really leave you with much new to remember him by. His sprite is almost just a recolor of Lorelei's, the first member of the Gen 1 Elite Four.
Male trainer, short purple hair, mask, funny suit. Female trainer, long red hair tied back in a ponytail, glasses, simple shirt and skirt. Totally a recolor, guys!
And he even has a Slowbro and a Jinx like her too. Will just kinda seems like they were in a hurry, so they gave Lorelei a different name and switched up as few party members as they could get away with to give the team a new typing. Not a great first impression.
You do realize that your complaint of supposed laziness could also apply to their use of Koga and Bruno as Johto Elite 4 members, right? Given that in their case they actually did just recycle prominent trainers from the previous games?
In Generation 3, Sydney is the first member of the Hoenn Elite Four. He's an upbeat person who enjoys what he does, even if he loses. He uses a team of Dark-type Pokemon. In the original games, his team was okay, but in the remake of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, with the introduction of Fairy types, Sydney became a total pushover, especially with Mega Evolution. All you really need is any Fairy-type Pokemon on your team that can Mega Evolve and knows Moonblast.
Complaining that any Mega Evolving Fairy type with Moonblast can sweep through Sydney's new team, despite the fact that any good fighting type could sweep through Sydney's old team. The only mons in his old team that have any counters against fighting type Pokemon are Shiftry, who has Extra Sensory, and Absol, who has Aerial Ace. Even with that in mind, if you have Blaziken as your fighting type on your team, Shiftry and Absol will still be dealt with before they can do any real damage, thanks to the fact that Blaziken is faster than Absol, and might be faster than Shiftry depending on its nature and or whether or not you bothered EV training it to boost its speed. There's also the fact that Shiftry and Absol have low defensive stats, meaning that even if either of them do get the first hit in, they won't last for very long. Even if you're instead using Medicham, Hariyama, or possibly even Breloom as your fighting type Pokemon instead of Blaziken. Blaziken can even take care of Sharpedo or Crawdaunt, the part water type mon he has on his team. Sharpedo if you're playing Ruby or Sapphire, Crawdaunt if you're playing Emerald. Sharpedo may be faster than Blaziken, but even with Blaziken not being able to take many hits, I doubt Sharpedo's Surf will take Blaziken out in one hit unless it gets a well-timed crit. And Sharpedo's defenses are abysmal, meaning that any decent fighting type attack from Blaziken will take Sharpedo out in one hit. Crawdaunt is bulkier than Sharpedo, but it's also slower, meaning that Blaziken will get the first hit. And like with Sharpedo, unless Crawdaunt crits, Crawdaunt's Surf probably won't one-hit Blaziken. And if you're using a different fighting type Pokemon, Sydney is even more screwed since no other fighting types in Hoenn are weak to water.
And the battle would be over in a matter of minutes. You would have thought that they would have mixed up his team a little bit more to compensate for the new Fairy type. Instead, he became one of the easiest Elite Four members of all time.
You mean like how they could have updated Agatha's team in Fire Red and Leaf Green to account for more Ghost-type Pokemon and Ghost-types actually being able to put up a fight against Psychic types, but still only had 3 of her Mons be Ghost-type and all but 1 Poison, and 1 Mon on each for teams not having to move strong against Psychic types? At least Sydney had 2 Mons each in his rematch team with Poison, Psychic, and Flying moves to cover all of their weaknesses.
Number 4. Bertha. Bertha, the Gen 4 Ground-type Elite Four member, actually has a lot of Pokemon I like on her team. Hippowdon, Sudowoodo,
which is a pure rock-type Pokemon, meaning it has even more weaknesses, and it's not present in her Platinum team.
Quagsire,
which she also doesn't have on her Platinum team.
that other water ground type.
Whiscash, which is the sole water ground type on her Platinum team.
But her real crime, repetitive typings aside,
yeah, you know who else your argument of repetitive typing to type overlap can apply to? Agatha and Lance. Yes, you heard me right. Lance. The argument regarding type overlap of Agatha's Pokemon also applies to Lance. The Dratini evolutionary line were the only Dragon types available in the original games, meaning that he had to fall back on Gyarados and Aerodactyl to fill out his team, both of which shared a secondary flying type with Dragonite, meaning that all but one of his Pokemon are weak to ice, Gyarados being that one thanks to it being part water. Even if you didn't have an ice type on your team, chances are that you had a water type that knew Ice Beam, and you probably had an electric type or a Pokemon that otherwise had Thunderbolt as an attack to take care of Gyarados. Lance's situation really didn't improve in the Gen 2 games due to the fact that the only Dragon type Pokemon added to the Johto Pokédex was Kingdra. Lance does have an edge over Agatha, however. At least his non-Dragon type Pokemon all have draconic appearances to make them fit into his team that way, unlike Agatha's Arbok and Golbat, who are far from ghost-like and are apparently only on her team because snakes and bats are supposed to be spooky. Lance had a fairly prominent presence outside of the Pokemon League in the Johto games. Lance's rematch team in Fire Red and Leaf Green evolved one Dragonair and replaced the other with Kingdra, and his rematch team in Heart Gold and Soul Silver replaced two of his Dragonites with Salamence and Altaria, and his Aerodactyl was replaced with Garchomp. That said, it makes all but two of his rematch mons in Heart Gold and Soul Silver double weak to Ice-type attacks. And those two Pokemon that aren't double weak to Ice attacks are Gyarados and Charizard, which he had on his initial team. Your complaints about repetitive typing applies to both Agatha and Lance, yet neither of them appear on your list, nor Brandon's list. How come Agatha and Lance get a pass, yet Chantal and Bertha were thrown in despite having less problems with their team than Agatha and Lance do?
It's just that she isn't very memorable. Elite Four members have a really short time to leave a lasting impression, which means that what little we have to go off of counts way more than it would for most any other NPC. From appearance to dialogue to party members, each aspect has to wow us for them to stick out in our minds, or else we'll move on and forget we even battled them.
You mean that a kindly grandmother type of an old lady who still doesn't hesitate to kick your ass in battle and probably did kick your ass in battle didn't leave a lasting impression? How high are your standards?
Unfortunately for Bertha, it feels like her sprite was copy-pasted from Agatha.
Never mind that Bertha looks a lot nicer and less like a mean old crone than Agatha does.
And her dialogue was copy-pasted from Karen, which doesn't leave much room for her to stand out on her own. With just her ragtag team of ground types to rely on for staying power, she ends up getting washed out in the sandstorm.
Are you serious? You're really just complaining about her sprite and dialogue now? In that case, why not complain about Lorelei, who didn't have any memorable dialogue, or Koga, who changed very little from his time as Fuchsia Gym Leader in the previous games, or Bruno, who didn't change at all from his time as an Elite Four member in the Gen 1 games to his time as an Elite Four member in the Gen 2 games?
Going back to the beginning, the very first Elite Four member we ever faced was Lorelei. She's a master of the Ice-type Pokemon, but the problem with her team was that she had mostly part Water types, which led to her having a huge disadvantage against Electric-type Pokemon.
Dewgong, Ice Water, Cloyster, Ice Water, Jinx, Ice Psychic, Lapras, Ice Water, Articuno, Ice Flying. It's inevitable that she'd have a lot of water types on her team when there were only 5 Ice-type evolutionary lines in the Gen 1 games, 3 of which were part water type, and 1 she wouldn't have been able to have to begin with because it was a legendary.
Because of this, anyone with a Raichu or a Jolteon,
or Pikachu if you were playing yellow,
except for Jinx. At that point, all you'd need is a fire type to take it out.
Taking out Lorelei's team is not as easy as you make it out to be. You know what all of her part water type Pokemon have in common? They're all bulky. Although Cloyster's bulk is in physical defense, meaning it would be an easy takedown for electric-type Pokemon in the Kanto games. However, Slowbro's special defense is passable, and Dewgong's special defense is pretty good. Same with Lapras, which in its case is aided by its phenomenal HP. And Dewgong, Slowbro, and Lapras all have moves to give electric-type Pokemon a hard time. Dewgong has Rest, in the Gen 1 games at least, that was taken out in the Gen 3 remakes. Slowbro has Amnesia, and Lapras has Confuse Ray. Granted, it loses Confuse Ray and Lorelei's rematch team in Gen 3, but its bulk means it'll still take a bit of time to bring it down anyways.
At least after the Sevi Islands, they gave her a Piloswine to make her a little tougher, but that still doesn't help her too much, as she still has way too many part water types on her team.
And that Piloswine replaces her Slowbro, meaning every single mon on her rematch team is part ice type. You could argue that they should have had Hoenn Pokemon to choose from, but even the Sevi Islands only have Kanto and Johto Pokemon. If you want Hoenn Pokemon, you have to trade for them. So of course the Elite Four's rematch teams won't have any Hoenn Pokemon. But even if they did have Hoenn Pokemon to choose from, the only real options she would have are Glalie, which is a pure ice type, and Walrein, which is an ice-water type. You could make a case for Cast Form, but then that Cast Form would need Hail in its moveset for it to change it to an ice type since it's normal type by default. Regice is another legendary, so she wouldn't have access to that anyways, meaning that either way, she would have secondary type overlap either through part water or through the lack of any secondary type.
Number 3, Glacia. The Gen 3 Elite Four is one of my favorites. They're stylish, they're edgy, and Glacia is no exception. My only issue with her is the fact that while her colleagues might have a repeating species here and there, Glacia only has 2 species of Pokemon at all, the Snow-Right line and the Spheal line.
Because they're the only ice types available in Hoenn besides Regice.
Gen 3 to pick from, but maybe at that point they should have realized having an ice type Elite Four member when you only have 2 ice types in your regional decks was a bad idea, and just picked a different type and built a more interesting team for her. Even if they had gone with grass type, she would have had more variety.
But a grass type Elite Four member arguably would have been an even easier battle. Despite grass having more resistances than ice, grass also has more weaknesses than ice. Also, if you're really relying on the small amount of ice types in Hoenn as an argument for why Glacia isn't a good Elite Four member, then why aren't you complaining about Agatha being a Ghost type Elite Four member and Lance being a Dragon type Elite Four member respectively in Kanto, when Kanto only has 1 evolutionary line each of Ghost type and Dragon type Pokemon?
Glacia might have looks and charm, but an interesting team she does not.
You're missing 2 details about Glacia and about the Hoenn region that I think are quite important in figuring out Glacia's choice of team. You know why there are so few ice-type Pokemon in the Hoenn region? Because Hoenn is a tropical region. You know why Glacia has an ice-type team in spite of that? Because she's not from Hoenn. She's from a different region and presumably trained with ice types before traveling to Hoenn. It can be safe to assume that she became an Elite Four member because, despite having very few ice-type Pokemon to work with in Hoenn, she worked with the options she had and kicked many trainers' asses. And I think the Hoenn Pokemon League had another good reason to have Glacia, a trainer specializing in ice types, as a member of their Elite Four. Like I said, Hoenn is a tropical region. With that in mind, I can imagine that there are plenty of Hoenn trainers who wouldn't give much thought on how to deal with ice-type Pokemon because there are so few of them in the region. But to the Pokemon League, that doesn't matter, because as a trainer, you have to know how to deal with every Pokemon type, regardless of how rare they are. You see, this is the kind of stuff you think about when you keep in mind the fact that Pokemon, first and foremost, is an RPG. Players are meant to focus on the setting, world building, and characters first and foremost. Your complaints about Glacia completely missed the point of her character.
Flint from Gen 4 is a Fire-type master who looks like Ronald McDonald's long-lost cousin. Being a Fire-type master, you'd think he uses nothing but Fire types, right? Well, not in Diamond and Pearl. In those games he had a bit more variety on his team, with a Steelix, Lopunny, and a Drifbloom, which made him pretty challenging.
Yeah, despite being advertised as the Fire-type Elite Four member, only 2 out of the 5 mons he used in Diamond and Pearl were Fire-type. Do you really not see the problem with that? If they're advertised as using one type of Pokemon on their team, the majority of their team, if not their entire team, should have that type. So in that respect, adding more Fire-type Pokemon in Platinum and giving Flint more Fire types to work with is a good thing.
However, in Pokemon Platinum, they nerfed him to the ground, giving him all Fire types to battle with, leaving his team totally weak to any Water type with Surf.
Okay, they could have done better than to make 3 out of the 5 mons on his Platinum team pure Fire types, but there were very few choices of Fire type mons in the Sinnoh games. In Platinum, your only choices of Fire type mons were the Chimchar line, the Ponyta line, Flareon, the Houndour line, or the Magby line. If you're not against using legendaries, there's also Heatran, but that may or may not count since you can't catch it until after you beat the Elite Four, regardless of which Sinnoh game you're playing. If you're playing Diamond and Pearl and you want Flareon, Houndoom, or Magmortar, you can't get any of them until after you beat the Elite Four either, meaning that if you want to raise a Fire-type Mon for your team early on but don't want Chimchar as your starter, you're stuck with raising a Ponyta and evolving it into Rapidash. Expanding the Sinnoh Pokédex in Platinum to include more Fire types to catch early on, and giving Flint a full team of Fire-type Mons is basically Game Freak's way of admitting they made a mistake and fixing that mistake. I could see what they were going for, but their fixes in Platinum says they initially went too far with it. There still aren't many Fire-type Mons, but you know why that is? Because Sinnoh is based on the northern Japanese island of Hokkaido, meaning that Sinnoh is a colder region than the others, meaning that Sinnoh isn't going to have many Fire-type Pokemon anyways.
It's like he went from being a Big Mac to a hot and spicy. It's just not as satisfying. Whoever thought this was a good idea really needs to be fired.
Chugga Conroy, you are not. Also, regarding your complaint about how they nerfed Flint by making his team all fire types, they offset that by giving him a second Mon that knows Solar Beam. Given that 2 of his Mons know Sunny Day, and that his Infernape still knows Thunder Punch, his overall team can give Water types, Ground types, and Rock types an even harder time. So it's easy to argue that they actually made his team better.
Number 2, Bruno. Bruno, unlike most Elite Four members, got a second chance to prove himself. As a member of both the Gen 1 and Gen 2 Elite Four, he has twice as many lines and battles as any other Elite Four member. And how does he use this precious extra chance for an impression? By saying basically the same thing both times and being the shortest and easiest battle in both of his Elite Four lineups. Bruno, Bruno, Bruno. Most Elite Four members would kill for the screen time you got, and you squandered it.
Really? That's all you have to say about the Elite Four member that's taken up the number 2 spot on your list? That he wasted his screen time and was an easy fight no matter which game you played? You didn't even complain about his teams, and that actually could have made for a really good argument to use to explain his placement on your list. Unlike Agatha and Lance, Bruno had no excuse of not having enough Mons of his type to choose from. Each Elite Four member in Gen 1 had 5 Mons on their teams. Bruno had enough to choose from that he could have had an entire team of fighting-type Pokemon. Replace his 2 Onix with Poliwrath and Primeape. There you go. It's only worse in Gen 2, given that he still had 1 Onix on his team. He replaced the other with Hitmontop, yet he kept 1 despite having the choice between Primeape, Poliwrath, and Heracross to replace it. Even if the only fighting-type moves Heracross could learn in Gen 2 were Counter, Reversal, and Rock Smash, that doesn't change the fact that it's still a fighting-type Mon that Bruno could have chosen for his team. Yet he still kept that damn Onix. Also, how did you miss the fact that thanks to Chuck, another fighting-type specialist being one of the Johto gym leaders, Bruno's return to the Elite Four was completely redundant? Granted, that would also rule out both Lorelei and Agatha coming back due to Price and Morty being Johto gym leaders, but they couldn't have come up with a new character, possibly related to one of the Johto or Kanto gym leaders, that used a different type? They could have used a trainer that used ground, rock, water, electric, grass, or fire. But nope, they just took the easy way out and brought Bruno back. Even in his rematch team in Fire Red and Leaf Green, he kept both Onix and evolved them. At least in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, he got rid of that other Onix so his rematch team had all fighting types. This is only saying to me that you and Brandon didn't bother doing any sort of research to put together this list. And we still got their number 1 picks to get through. This is gonna hurt.
And my number 1 pick for the worst Elite Four member is Malva. Everyone should have seen this one coming.
Are you fucking kidding me? Are you seriously picking an Elite Four member from X and Y to put at the top of your list? We haven't even gotten Pokémon Z yet. We don't know what they're doing besides giving Zygarde more forms, and as far as we know, they can also be fixing stuff they messed up in X and Y, including making the Elite Four members more challenging battles, and maybe doing more stuff with Team Flare. I thought you two were jumping the gun in your top 10 worst X and Y Pokemon list, but this just removes all doubt. You really should have waited until the 3rd game to make this fucking list. Damn you people!
The Pokemon X and Y Elite Four were by far the easiest to beat, especially for someone with an all-fire type team like this. Her entire team can be knocked out by a good water type with Surf, even without Mega Evolution. Now if that isn't easy, I don't know what is. This is the same problem that all fire type trainers have.
I already explained why your argument that Flint is a crappy Elite Four member was bullshit, but go on.
It reminds me so much of how easy Blind was in Pokemon Red and Blue.
And they made his team more challenging in Yellow. Did you forget about that?
But this is an Elite Four member. They're supposed to be a challenge, not pushovers. These people aren't elite at all, and they don't deserve to be there. I hope that in the next new Pokemon game, they bring back the challenge.
So you're acknowledging the possibility that they might get better in the new game? Then why did you put Malva on your list in the first place?
Because I was very disappointed with how easy all the Kalos Elite Four were. All of them really deserve to be on this list.
Let me explain something to you. You know why the Kalos Elite Four seems so easy compared to the Elite Four of other regions? Because the EXP share was changed. In Gen 1, it was an item called the EXP All that shared experience equally between all party members. However, it meant that even mons that did participate in the battle didn't get as much EXP as they would have if you didn't have the EXP All with you. Also, unlike subsequent generations, any Pokemon that didn't participate in the battle didn't gain the stat experience, otherwise known as effort values, that it would have gained if it participated in the battle. Meaning that if you used the EXP All, it was impossible for underleveled Pokemon on your team to play catch up with your higher level mons. Also, if you wanted to raise a team quickly in Gen 1, you were better off using the missing number glitch to get a fuck ton of rare candies and stat boosting vitamins and speed raising your team that way. From Gen 2 to Gen 5, the EXP share was a held item, meaning that sharing the EXP points gained from beating various trainers would only apply to one Pokemon at a time, and that Pokemon happened to be whichever Pokemon was holding the EXP share at that time. Starting with X and Y, however, the EXP share was changed into a key item that you could turn on or off. When it was turned on, every Pokemon in your party that didn't participate in the battle gained half of the EXP and all of the effort values that mons who participated in that battle gained. So it took the best of the EXP All and the previous incarnation of the EXP share, meaning that there's no real downside to leaving it on all the time. Meaning that you, like many other players, probably never had the EXP share turned off. Meaning that it's very easy to overlevel the Pokemon on your team. Meaning that by that late in the game, your team is probably overleveled to the point that the Elite Four would be an easy takedown. Really, your complaints about the Elite Four being too easy just calls to attention a bigger issue with X and Y. If you leave your EXP share on all the time, your team will probably be overleveled, and as a result, the game will be too easy. If you leave the EXP share off, however, your team will probably be underleveled, and as a result, the game will be too hard. Good luck if you want to find a nice middle road, because finding out the perfect on periods and off periods is practically an art form you'd have to master, and it would take up too much time. You might as well just deal with the fact that X and Y unintentionally give you two difficulty settings, easy mode and challenge mode, without presenting a good middle ground. Really, you're just skirting over a much bigger issue with those games, and turning the Kalos Elite Four into scapegoats. Knock that shit off!
But at the end of the day, Malva to me is the weakest Elite Four member.
So basically what you're saying is that the sole factor you looked at when putting together your worst Elite Four members list is how powerful they were in battle? Oh, never mind how they present themselves as characters, or how many of them actually did shit outside of the Pokemon League, like Lorelei, who had a role to play in the Sevii Islands in Fire Red and Leaf Green, or Flint, who appeared outside of the League building a few times in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, or Caitlyn, who was the head of the Battle Frontiers Battle Castle in Platinum, Heart Gold, and Soul Silver, or Malva, who used to be a member of Team Flare and also works as a Holocaster news reporter. Maybe we might find out more about Malva in the new game. See, there is absolutely no reason for Malva to be on this list, much less at the top of this list, since there's still so much we could potentially find out about her. So really, this just says to me that you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. So how about you do us all a favor and
Shut the fuck up!
And my number one least favorite Elite Four member is Siegebold.
excuse me for a moment. Dear sweet Arceus, are you fucking
Let me tell you something about the Gen 6 Elite Four. It sucks. Nobody has more than 4 Pokemon.
You mean like the Unova Elite Four when they first started out?
It's one of the only ways in the post-game to grind for levels and cash.
Just money grind at the Battle Chateau or Lumio City's restaurants. It's much easier. Did you know that?
There are no Pokemon Centers in the first 2 towns of the game after you finish, so you have to walk your ass to Aquacord just to use the PC box and get a Pokemon that can fly.
Oh, boo fucking who, you gotta run through more areas in order to access the nearest PC and get a flyer. Not that big a deal, you petty bitch.
just so you can go back and fight the same battles over and over and over again.
You can make similar arguments about the Elite Four in Red, Blue, Yellow, Gold, Silver, Crystal, Ruby, and Sapphire. Having to walk to Viridian City, Cherry Grove City, or Oldale Town if you don't have a flyer on your team, and the Elite Four actually being the only viable option for grinding in Red, Blue, Yellow, Ruby, and Sapphire, and one of the few choices outside of Red and the Trainer House in Gold, Silver, and Crystal. It wasn't until Fire Red and Leaf Green that the games gave the Elite Four new and more powerful teams for rematches to make leveling up your Pokemon an easier task. Also, Battle Chateau. You have more trainers to battle, the levels of their teams vary widely to allow for the use of different level mons in battle for the purposes of leveling up your team, and you can make more money in a shorter amount of time.
No one in the Chaos Elite Four has particularly enjoyed a battle, but Siege Bold takes the cake for most irritating of them all. Every time you battle him, he asks you if you consider Pokemon battling to be an art, because he simply can't say. If you say yes, he agrees and talks about how artful life is. If you say no, though, he throws a fit and insults you. What a pretentious jerk. Why even begin with the premise that both answers are equally valid if you can't handle it when some kid doesn't validate your precious opinion?
Is this really all you have to complain about regarding Seabold? And yes, his name is pronounced Seabold, not however the fuck you've been pronouncing it. Also, if all the different fan-made challenges such as Monotype runs, Nuzlocke runs, and Avatar challenges have proven anything to me, it's that Pokemon battling can indeed be seen as an art form. Also, let's not forget the obvious answer of, Pokemon is a series of video games, and video games can be considered a form of art.
It doesn't even matter what I actually think about Pokemon battling being an art or not. Just the way he reacts if you don't stroke his ego is enough to make me say no to him every time just to make him mad.
If you think Seabold's a jerk because he goes off on you if you say Pokemon battling isn't an art form, and you repeatedly answer no to his question just to piss him off, then what does that make you?
So those are our opinions on the top 10 worst Elite Four members. Which ones do you guys think were the worst? Let us know in the comments section below.
At least you're allowing comments unlike Tamashii, so points there I guess.
Make sure to go check out her channel as well. The link to her channel will be in the description below. Thank you all for watching, this has been Brandon, and I'll see you in the next video.
Dear God, this list was even worse than the other collab list. Just what kind of Pokemon fan are they trying to cater to? How do people even like these top 10 lists? How do Brandon and Tamashii not understand the faulty logic they've been using? I've done a better job explaining why some of the Elite Four members are on their list than they did, and I've explained why other Elite Four members are worse than any of the Elite Four members they named. Except for Bruno, but Tamashi's reasons seem insignificant compared to the issues with him that I brought up. Also, I'm still fucking pissed that they both named Elite Four members from X and Y for their number 1 spots. I can understand if Gen 6 had already run its course and none of them were developed further, but we've yet to get sequels or a third game for the X and Y series. It'll be a while before we get a new Gen 6 game, and I'd like to think that it'll fix a lot of the problems X and Y had. I think I'm still getting over having my mind blown at just how stupid their reasonings were. Now, if you'll excuse me, I gotta get back to work on other projects. This is Gale Force saying thank you all for watching, and have a nice day on the internet, everybody!